Hello, today we're going to walk through a fresh install of Windows Server 2019. This specific install is going to be using Workstation 14 Pro. So if you're installing this on a bare metal server or device, the beginning steps will be a little different. But this will definitely give you a really good idea and show you exactly how to install a fresh instance of Windows Server on Workstation 14 Pro. So to start, what you will need is, of course, an ISO. As you can see, I've got an ISO for Windows Server 2019 right here. And that's really all you need. That and, of course, some available resources in order to install it. So to get this install going, what we're going to need to do is click on create a new virtual machine right here, or click on File and New Virtual Machine right there. From here, I'm just going to go through the typical install. I'm going to make a couple changes, and I'll make sure I point those out as we come across them. Here you're going to want to select, you can do this now or later, but since we've already got the image, might as well do it now. The ISO image that we're going to install the actual operating system off of, we can go ahead and map that to this virtual machine right now. Go ahead and click Next. From here, we need to tell VMware Workstation which drivers to load for it. As you can see, there's several different options here. Of course, we want Microsoft Windows. A bunch of different options for that. Here I'm going to select Server 2016 because there is not an option for 2019. For the most part, this is going to work just fine. I've really only ran into problems once, and that was running a specific version of Workstation 14. I haven't had it on this specific version, which I'll try and put a link to this specific version of VMware Workstation 14 I'm using in the description below. But I'm going to go ahead and select Server 2016 right here. Just in case you run into the problem I was running into, what would happen was I would create the virtual machine, everything would work fine, and then once I shut that virtual machine off and tried to turn it back on, it wouldn't start. I would just get a black screen, and I would actually have to restart my computer in order to actually start the virtual machine. I found out that the fix was to actually go in and change the drivers it was using from Server 2016. I switched it to 2008 R2, and everything worked fine after that. But like I said, I've only really ran into that problem once. If you run into that, that was the fix that I had. But hopefully you won't run into that issue. Okay, we'll go ahead and click Next. We can go ahead and name this server whatever we want. I'm going to change the name to Server 2019 because that's what it is. And click Next. Now we're going to select the size of the, essentially the C drive for this virtual machine. This can be really whatever you want. I'm going to select 20 gigs because this server is only going to be running Active Directory, DNS, and a couple other very small services that don't take up a lot of hard drive capacity. Go and click Next. Here I am going to customize the hardware. I'm going to bump this up to 4 gigs of memory. You can make this whatever you want. Of course, if you plan on your Windows Server instance doing a lot of heavy lifting, you probably want to give it more resources. But for my purposes, just using 4 gigs of memory and just a single processor is going to work just fine. Also here, depending on how you have your networking setup within a VMware Workstation, you might have to change your network adapter here. But for me and my purposes, this is going to work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out and then click on Finish. From there, we have the configuration done on how we want the hardware resources to act for the virtual machine, so we can go ahead and power it on. From here, we are going to have to press a key to go ahead and boot from that ISO that we selected earlier. One of the beauties of a virtual machine is they do boot up very quickly, so there's not a whole lot of waiting. From here, this is going to be exactly the same as Windows Server installs have been for years and years. Very wizard driven, very simple. We're just going to click Next, Install Now. Here, I will need to enter in a license key. I am, of course, not going to show this. I'll go ahead and skip to after I've entered the key and then clicked Next. But you will need to do that. So you'll need to make sure you do have a licensed copy of Windows Server. Okay, after entering in the license key and then clicking next, you are brought to this next screen. Two different options to actually install Windows Server. It's very important that you select the correct one. If you choose the top one, that is not going to install the GUI. So that's basically you're doing things from command prompt, things like that. So as you can see, it omits most of the graphical environment. So no GUI. So if you're not very well versed in command prompt and PowerShell, then you're going to want to use the desktop experience, and that's what I'm going to do now. Just want to click next. Going to accept the license terms. Of course, after we read all of it, I read it right before this video, so I have that memorized. We'll click next. We're going to do. I always do a custom install, and then just click next right here. So as we can see, the 20 gigs is what we selected in the configuration screen within VMware Workstation. I'm going to click next there, and it is going to actually go ahead and do the install. All right, after the install is completed, it will prompt you to restart. So you can just wait for it to do it itself, or you can click restart now. Okay, after it did its thing, it rebooted once. It prompts us to enter in a password. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, and then we can actually log into the user interface here. Since this is a fresh install, we are just logging into the administrator account. All I'm really going to do with this fresh install is just a couple of things that I always do whenever I have a fresh install, especially when it's running in a VMware environment. We'll just walk through those, just a couple of them. All right, I always select no to the, do we want to make it discoverable? All right, after a few seconds, Server Manager is going to pop up. This is really where you do anything you need to do from a management perspective, for the most part, in Windows Server. I'm going to click on Don't Show This Message Again. I always get annoyed when I get pop-ups like that. So. All right, things I always do is I always click on Configure this local server. It always takes a second to populate, but here we can see what's going on with the server, how things are configured right now, and I'm going to make a few changes to those right now. But first, what I always like to do is install a thing called VMware Tools, or VM Tools. As you can see at the bottom, it's actually prompting us to do that right now. So if you have this prompt right here, you can install the tools from here by clicking Install Tools, or if you want, you can right-click on Server 2019 or the whatever you named your virtual machine, and go to Install Tools from that. That will then mount a virtual drive into the virtual machine. One thing I always do to my pretty much any fresh Windows install is I always change whenever I the quick access stuff. Whenever I launch Windows Explorer, I don't want it to go to quick access. I want it to go to this PC. That just makes a lot more sense to me. So here, if we just click on this PC, we can see the VMware Tools. The virtual drive has been mounted, so we can just double click that or right click it and go to Run. And then it will install the VMware Tools. And so what this does is it makes the experience a lot better. It makes it a lot more user-friendly. I believe it installs some drivers to where you can do things like copy-paste inside and outside of the virtual machine, adjust resolution, things like that. Just makes it a lot easier to work with the virtual machine. As you can see, it's wizard-driven, very easy. I'm just going to go through and click Next on things and then Install. And it's going to go ahead and install, and then it's going to prompt us to restart the virtual machine. Once it has installed, we will see the resolution adjust to take advantage of the full window within VMware Workstation, like it just did. So much better, much more user-friendly. Like I said, there's a lot more functionality that's added by doing this. That's something that I always personally do whenever I'm creating a fresh virtual machine. So we went ahead and installed that, and now it's prompting us to restart. So I'm going to go ahead and click Yes to that. Okay, as you can see, we are back to the lock screen. If you're not familiar with it, if you need to log into a desktop like I need to within VMware Workstation right now, you don't actually hit Control-Delete. If you hit Control-Delete, then that will send that command to your the actual PC that you're logged into, right? The actual hardware that you're connected to, not the virtual machine. To send that command to the virtual machine, you actually click Control-Alt-Insert, and that will pull up the login screen. So we just enter in the password, and then Server Manager will pop back up. So from here, we actually have a brand new, fresh install of Windows Server 2019. Nothing's configured. It's just a fresh install that we can, configure any services we need to, install any applications we need to serve, whoever or whatever needs to be served. But from here, just a couple things that I always like to do just to make things easy for myself and really helps with troubleshooting a lot later on is I always like to turn off some of the firewall settings. So I'm not saying to do this in every case. I'm saying that for me and my purposes and what I use this for, the firewalls always seem to get in the way, and always just add a troubleshooting step later on. So I always like to go in and turn off the firewall. Of course, when you do this, you are turning off the firewall, so you want to, you don't want to put yourself at risk. So if this isn't a test dev environment or something like that, you always want to make sure that you're abiding by your company's, rules as far as, security goes. One thing about Server Manager, after you make any changes and you want to see if that change took place, it doesn't update automatically, or at least it takes a while. So you can refresh it locally, or instantly if you want to, by clicking the refresh button up here. As you can see, when I did that, it now has the Windows Defender Firewall as off. A couple other things I always do is always enable remote desktop connection, because a lot of times I will just log into the server via remote desktop, and this is how you enable that right here. Other things I always do, I always turn off Defender Antivirus. So always turn all of these off, because a lot of times this is in a closed network to where it doesn't have internet connection anyway. So a lot of things like cloud deliver protection just won't work. So always turn those off. IE enhanced security configuration. And me personally, I always turn these off because pretty much everything I do is a test dev environment. So it's typically okay to run fast and wild. From here, you can set your time zone just by clicking on time zone, change your date and time, things like that. But the last thing I want to show is setting a static IP address. So this is like setting a static IP address in any Windows instance in the last 15, 20 years. It's going to look and feel pretty much the same. So the way I'm going to do it is just click on Ethernet 0, just left click on it. It's going to pull up the network connection that we see here. I'm going to go to Properties, IPv4, and go to Properties there, and now I'm going to set that static IP address. I am going to leave DNS server blank right here. That's because in the next video I'm actually going to configure Active Directory and DNS in this as well. So I'm going to leave that blank, but I am going to go ahead and configure the IP address for this virtual machine. If I just go to OK and then close, now we can open up PowerShell or command prompt, whichever you prefer, and then we can do an IP config, and we can see the IP address we just set, and then we can also try and ping our default gateway just to make sure that we have connectivity there. If we don't, then of course we'll need to double check our network settings. But as you can see, we do have it is pingable, so it's reachable, so we should be good to go. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for watching. Like I said, I am planning on making a few additional videos on how to do the initial configuration for a couple of Windows services like Active Directory, DNS, probably NTP, and maybe a few others. So go ahead and subscribe and sit tight and wait for the next videos. Thanks. Bye.